Welcome back to Constructive Politicism. My name is Luke Brown, your host, and I'm very excited because today is the first piece of long form content that will be uploaded to this channel and hopefully the first of many. Today I'm going to be discussing a topic that is near and dear to my heart, something that I've been acutely interested for a long time, but really developed and started to gain a better understanding of over the course of a program at Brown University. So let me preface by describing my experiences there. So at Brown University this past summer, I studied and I took a course called "What What's So Great About Democracy?" And when you think about that question, it's kind of provocative because, I mean, you obviously, for us who live in America, we think of democracy as the gold standard for political system, right? And that's just kind of how it's been ingrained in our minds and ideologies, and at least that's how it is for most Americans. But when you fully gain understanding, you kind of what the course did is give you an understanding and kind of a better a better and nuanced timeline is how I would describe it of how democracy has evolved over because it's been over 300 years. And if you look at the original key components on which democracy was founded on, especially the American concepts of democracy, those are hundreds of years old. And a lot of them started with the Enlightenment period. And a lot of the documents that were found in, you think of these hallmarks of what democracy means to America, whether it be, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, stuff like that. These were not intended to be long-term fixes, and as we see, democracy has really transcended and transformed and took on multiple different bodies and shapes over the course of America, and it's really become this thing where, do we even really know what democracy is? So the course took you through, various different, I guess, components of democracy and kind of divided them into two buckets where you have the tangible components of democracy. So you have things like separation of powers, checks and balances, some stuff that's written into the stuff that is written and explicitly outlined as a facet of democracy, if you will. And then you have these sort of ephemeral traits of democracy, which can be, I say, best described as the culture of democracy. And I think these are, if not just as important as the real tangible aspects of democracy, because I think that the intangible, ephemeral culture of democracy is the one that affects most Americans directly. And I think it affects them more consistently. And when you think about what is most important, and today this will be the focus of the video, one of the most important qualities of democracy that falls under that category of the culture of democracy. Some people might think of things like, uh, stuff like freedom of expression, which is directly related, reduce censorship, which is a very hot topic and contentious issue because, even, things like gun rights, the Second Amendment protections, and whether it be fair and free elections, things like the peaceful transition of power. But in my opinion, and those are kind of mixed into, like, for example, like censorship. Obviously, when the Constitution was written and you have free and fair speech, there's obviously going to be nuance to that in the current day because they obviously couldn't take into account the different various formats and media formats that would come with technological advancements such as social media. So the founding fathers weren't anticipating stuff like social media and the widespreadedness of disinformation and then things like that. So that's why these issues have become so contentious. But in my opinion, the one facet that is integral to the framework of democracy is the free expression of ideas in this country. And that boils down to a lot of things, or can be divided into a lot of things. And I think one thing that a lot of people would think about is free media, and I think that's certainly one aspect. And I think, as you'll see, as I'm about to touch in a brief moment, the media has become so saturated with various political ideologies to the point where a lot of media is more interested in promoting political agendas rather than reporting on the objective. Um, they're more focused on political ideologies than truth seeking, and I think that that's a real dire issue in this country. But I think the one thing that affects us the most, because all in all, you don't have to listen to the news; it's your choice. But I think the one thing that does affect all of us the most is the, I'll say, casual the casual um, exchange of ideas among peers and community members. And what this means is, over the course of years, really, we have transitioned to a place where polarization, because of the two-party system, has absolutely infested our conversations. And what I'm going to do is read an excerpt created for the aforementioned class, What's So Great About Democracy, regarding polarization. In the critical time of American politics, one of the largest and most cited issues regarding the political climate is polarization. Oxford Languages defines polarization as division into two sharply contrasting groups or sets of opinions or beliefs. This can be seen on a variety of scale factors all throughout American politics. From simple issues or stances among local community members to national broadcasted presidential debates, it seems as if discussion centered around politics has been engulfed by polarization. Before we examine the causes of polarization and how we can address them, let's first examine the exigence of this topic. What are the main impacts that polarization has had on the political landscape of America? It is generally agreed that polarization has served as a detriment to politics, but why is the question. The first and perhaps most cited reason for these sentiments surrounding polarization is that it discourages political discussion. Because there are two prevalent viewpoints for each and every issue, people start to look at politics as binary, with a right and wrong answer for each issue. And this has caused people to separate themselves on either side of the debate, with pro-choice versus pro-life, universal health care versus privatized health care, gun rights versus gun control. And because two polar opposites are the standard for most viewpoints, political discussion is unlikely to foster collaboration and compromise, but rather result in argument and resentment. And the truth of the matter is that a lot of times ideology isn't separated into two binary ideas. It often is a lot more nuanced than that, where there are exceptions and to every rule, and there are very specific circumstances under which you may believe one thing. And I think that the idea of political polarization, where you have to, in order for your voice to matter, you have to associate with a certain party that has, and there's only really two viable options, is unhealthy. So what this does is it leads to prominent stigmas which surround political discussion. And one example that comes to mind is the persona of the overly political uncle at the Thanksgiving table, who is constantly sparking conflict with his bombastic political dialogue. So what often occurs is that people make a conscious effort to avoid discussion centered around politics in an effort to avoid conflict. In fact, the American Psychological Association found that in December of 2024, 72% of adults said they hoped to avoid political discussions during the holidays, and 39% said they were stressed by the thought of politics coming up in holiday gatherings. So why is this an issue? Well, the ultimate fact is that political discussion should be a thing that is celebrated and healthy, as a hallmark of freedom of expression. Because at the end of the day, we are all Americans, and politics is one of the only topics that is pertinent to all of us. Discussion around politics, especially in local communities, should be encouraged rather than inhibited by fear and angst. In the same study by the APA, 77% of adults said that the future of the nation was a significant source of stress in their lives. Discussion and communication should be an avenue by which such reservations and thoughts regarding difficult topics which affect us all can be expressed and explored. That statistic clearly shows that we, as Americans, have a vested interest in politics. Instead of making an effort to avoid it, we should encourage engagement. And that starts on the smallest level, by being unafraid to bring up a controversial topic without being attacked for it. But often this is not possible due to the infestation of polarization. The second large consequence of polarization is stagnation in regard to policymaking. Similar to how everyday citizens are unable to engage in productive political discussion, politics are just alike, which does not bode well for productivity at the highest levels of government, which are founded on democratic principles like majority rule. This leads to gridlock in democratic institutions like Congress, who are unable to step across party lines and pass bipartisan policy which would serve for the best interests of all Americans. Instead, politicians refuse to compromise, resulting in less meaningful legislation being passed. In the 118th congressional session, or the most recent one, 274 bills were enacted into law. This number was the lowest since the 1950s and marked one of the most unproductive sessions of Congress in American history. Recent stagnation related to polarization and the unwillingness to collaborate led to multiple other recent and notable events, like the ousting of the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, which rendered the House effectively unable to function for 3 weeks before the elected officials could finally agree upon Mike Johnson as the replacement. Another prominent example is the large failure of Congress to agree upon a simple congressional spending bill, which nearly resulted in a government shutdown which would have left government employees without a paycheck and all government infrastructure and services in disarray. Furthermore, even the perceived willingness to collaborate in a bipartisan manner can be seen as a weakness for aspiring political actors. Celia Paris, an ISPS graduate student fellow in political science, writes in the Political Opinion Quarterly that voters often penalize same-party legislators who engage in bipartisan behavior, treating compromise as ideological betrayal. One example of this is Eric Adams, a former Democrat and mayor of New York City, who was ostracized from the Democratic Party and is now running for re-election as independent, partially as a result of his willingness to cooperate with Donald Trump in deportation efforts. Already, political candidates for the 2028 Democratic presidential nominee are being judged by their willingness to engage with Trump, with large political actors like Gavin Newsom being criticized for cooperating with ICE and even just having Republican figures on his podcast. So, and I want to pause here and kind of highlight the ludicrous nature of what I just kind of read out. So from a voter's perspective, what I just said there, instead of supporting a person who's willing to work in the best interest of all Americans, so you and your neighbor, the average voter would rather prefer a politician who is completely resentful and unwilling to work with the other side. Obviously, this is going to cause major issues in policy, where it takes. I mean, there's a reason why we have different types of voices in politics. Not everyone is represented by the same voice. So naturally, you have to have some compromise, but this increasingly divisive nature and mindset among Americans is constantly causing even more and more gridlock in fostering uncooperation throughout all of our democratic institutions. Okay, so now that we've established polarization as a problem, the next step is to address it. But in order to address it, we must first understand its causes. Perhaps the most glaring and obvious cause of polarization is the two-party system in America. What typically happens is that most voters in the system of polarized culture develop views from an early age, associate those views with the party that most closely represents those views, and then blindly pledges allegiance to whatever candidate that party puts forward for any specific election cycle. And then, especially now with widespread access to the internet, they defend such political actors for what they do in a similar manner to fans of a sports team defending their favorite player. Again, this culture of team versus team is frankly unhealthy and undemocratic. Famously, in his farewell address, George Washington warned us. However, political parties may now and then answer popular ends, they are likely in the course of time and things to become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which have lifted them to unjust dominion. Over time, people of different political parties develop a sense of resentment towards members of the other party and see them as enemies. Facing history and ourselves shows that in 2022, 62% of Republicans and 54% of Democrats had a very unfavorable view of the opposing political party. And a Johns Hopkins poll in 2024 found that nearly half of the United States electorate thinks members of the opposing party are downright evil. Another prominent contributor to polarization is the role of media in politics. And this is something I touched on earlier, but with more and more people spending increasingly large amounts of time on social media, naturally they're exposed to political content. Now, the goal for many of these apps is not to spread true and inaccurate information, but rather to feed the consumer content that they enjoy seeing. This leads to people forming and basing their political opinions on misconstrued facts designed to appeal to their ideology. In fact, Jason Brennan, political theorist at the University of Georgetown, found that 25% reported that 25% of people have a negative working knowledge of politics. Similarly, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation found that over 70% of Americans would fail a basic civic literacy test. But yet, this doesn't stop them from, going on their preferred social media platform and vehemently boasting their uninformed political views and presenting them as fact, with remarkable confidence behind the scenes of anonymity that social media provides. This leaves aspiring politicians in an interesting and delicate situation. They must choose between running on platforms that are in the best interest of American people or appealing to the people's misconstrued sense of government. Recently, we have seen a wave of anti-establishment, right-wing populist campaigns around the world, not just in America, that have been fueled and propelled by empty promises and rhetoric, which is further perpetuated by social media. These include Donald Trump, Nigel Farage, and Jair Bolsonaro, all of which have utilized such ideas within their campaigns to appeal to the average uneducated voter, and have ascended in power by doing so. Kurt Weiland, professor of government at the University of Texas at Austin, finds that before populist politicians speak in the name of the people, they must build a large audience. For many citizens, their first impression of a populist movement is formed by personalistic leaders. By managing politics in opportunistic ways, rather than following a strict program, populist leaders attract followers. Secondly, the media contribute to the construction or destruction and distribution of the populist voice. And through these channels of modern media, populism only furthers the narratives of divisiveness and polarization by demonizing members of minority classes. And this is something we've seen throughout history. So now that we've established why polarization is an issue and the causes of polarization, we must first ask ourselves, how can we address polarization? The solutions for polarization can be categorized into solutions that address democratic institutions and the culture of democracy. One recent institutional change is the switch to open primaries, so people don't feel that they have to pledge allegiance to a certain political party in order to have their voice heard. I think, however, the solution to polarization and the key to mitigating or at least counteracting its effects is through a larger cultural change and movement. This starts with breaking the stigma associated with political discussion and recognizing that as a community, politics affect us all. And we should be engaging with people of like-minded and different backgrounds and ideologies in order to figure out what's best for our nation rather than just ourselves. In today's culture, debate has a negative connotation, often regarded as inflammatory and unproductive. Instead, debate should be a way in which we engage with different thoughts and seek to win people over rather than to win the argument. We should seek to end the debate with a handshake and a new perspective rather than end the debate with insults and shouting. This kind of discussion can be achieved. And one place where it could potentially be is practiced is in the classroom. As part of civic education, which is often required in a lot of schools, we should also incorporate skills about how to engage in discourse and debate in a healthy and productive way. And in doing so, we can expose students to a variety of different perspectives, instead of the Democrat version and the Republican version, which all too overshadow the nuance that politics frequently involve. The fact of the matter is that within each party, there are many different ideologies and perspectives that associate with different people. But because people typically refrain from civic engagement for reasons described earlier, they aren't as invested into politics as they could be, and often have to conform their views to fit with what the elites who fund campaigns decide what is best for their party. By fostering political discussion, we could see an awakening and an increased awareness among the constituency who realize that if they have agency and influence on the direction that this country is going, and that if they are dissatisfied, which many people are, they're in a position to take control and make a meaningful difference on their future. So that's the end of the essay. Quickly closing thoughts. I think really the main, if there's one thing to take away from this, it's not that, and obviously over the course of decades, and we've kind of gotten just used to it and this is in 2025. I think I'm 16. So I can really only speak from this from a historic perspective. Obviously, I don't have the experience that people who have experienced the different cultures of democracy and which have changed over different presidencies. But I think, and this isn't just a Donald Trump problem, what has happened is because media and discussion surrounding politics has become so tribalized, and so, party versus party, so binary. What happens is instead of reason winning people over and appealing to ideologies, what has happened is the person with the loudest voice and the person that can gain the biggest following and the person that is the most widely appealing is the most attractive to the populace, to the electorate. And this isn't necessarily bad, but when you prioritize charisma and character traits and, over ideology and policy making, it leads to a degree of incompetence and ancillary traits which a leader in the past, like you think about the great leaders who are calm and collected and well informed and intentional in their policy making, like Ronald Reagan, Abraham Lincoln, people like that. They come with a lot of ancillary baggage, like Donald Trump's impulsivity, and that's really just his character. And it's going to attract a lot of people. And I have to admit, it's pretty funny to see him, and he's obviously very convicted in the policy that he believes in. It's clear he's not faking it. I mean, he's very propelled and motivated by his causes. So I think he is genuine in doing so. But the American people should really be focusing on electing a leader that serves in the best interests of all Americans, rather than one who is focused on, it's hard to put this in a way that won't inflame people if you're still watching, but one who's truly interested in dividing the country rather than bringing it together. And whether that be through words or through actions, it's mostly through words with the widespreadness of media and how quickly things get out. And it's just not a great situation for American politics to be in. But I appreciate you. I know this was long-winded, for listening to my my tangent, my ramble. More enlightened, uh, improved, and high level thinking will be to come in the future. I think future topics could include modern day political issues and how both parties stand, and how we can increase um, discussion and collaboration and foster a more collaborative mindset in American politics regarding specific political issues, but then also continuing to cover different facets of democracy and the state of democracy in contemporary America. But yeah, thank you for watching. I've been Luke Brown, and this has been Constructive Politicism.